Hey everybody, I'm Ramon Mejia from the LitRPG Podcast. Today I have the pleasure of talking with the author of the best-selling series, the Chaos Seed series. We talked to him a few times before, but it's always a pleasure to talk to one of the greatest guys in LitRPG writing. He's recently released the new book in his series, The Land, the Swarm. Please welcome our guest, Aleron Kong, the father of LitRPG.
Thanks, Ramon. It's always good to be back. Fun times. Always good to chat with a buddy. So what's up?
Hey, man. No, it's really, from my point of view, it's always really fun to talk to you. You're a good guy. You're always fun just to talk to in general. I wish we could do it more, to be honest. But we're here to talk about your fifth book in the LitRPG series. For the people who've never read your books, who don't know who you are, can you tell them a little bit about yourself as an author personally first?
Yeah. So I fell in love with LitRPG just like all of you guys did. I read the story and I was like, where have you been my whole life? And gobbled up everything that I could. And there wasn't that much. For people that are just finding it now and you're like, oh man, there's all these authors, there's all this whatever, that actually changed over the past year. It's only been in the US for about 2.5, 3 years. And for the first year of that, it might've been basically just Russian. And then a couple like notable names came in, like Brent Roth writing his Dragon Wrath series. That was big. And there were a couple other people that kind of dabbled with it. But when I started putting pen to paper back in September 15th, 2015, I think there were only like 4 or 5 guys at that time. I started writing my story and I made the Facebook group. And it's been awesome because a lot of people are finding their voice because they also love these stories. There's a lot of support between the readers and the authors. And now, I mean, we've got to have like 20, 30, maybe even 40, different people that are working on this, especially if you include the people that are on the royal road and kind of incorporating those kind of stories. So it's blowing up. My personal story is slightly different in that it's very LitRPG, but you're not stuck in the video game aspect. It was a video game that was a trick to pull you into a world that had these types of rules. And with that, I think it adds like a slightly different dynamic. But my basic tenets were, 1, to always try to write a story that I would want to read, but 2, to write a story that was realistic within the magic system. You're never going to find that like he shouldn't have a way to get out, but luckily he remembered this magic thing that he'd never thought about before. No, he's going to get totally hosed. And that's basically the Chaos Seed series. It's been going on for about 5 books. Those 5 books have only spanned about 5 months of time for the character itself. And he gets into a lot of trouble and gets a lot of fights and finds a lot of epic, cool gear. That's what he's about.
Yeah, absolutely. In the Chaos Seed series, our main character, Richter, has, and I'm saying it right for once.
Richter.
I
still love it.
I'm still going to get it wrong. Originally, I said Richard for forever until like book 4, and I talked to you and like that's how you say it. But anyways, our main character is transported from our world to a game world after he plays this virtual reality game, and he doesn't really read the terms of contract, unfortunately. And he's transported and he has to make his way in this entirely new world that's gamified. There are stats, levels, experience points, monsters. He makes friends with not a fairy, it's the
wood sprites.
With the wood sprite, right?
Yeah.
And he basically creates a community around this world. He makes a place for himself, and that's to me kind of the core of the series. It's Richard and his adventures, but it's also the community and building something of importance within this new world, making a new home for himself. So I think that's, to me, part of the core. Now, for people who don't know you personally, I think a lot of people, when they read this last book, were surprised when you put the doctor in front of it.
So I was surprised with that because I thought that I had put it in before, and people were like, oh, you're a doctor now? And I'm like, I was doctor for the whole time. But yeah, I am a internal medicine physician in Atlanta. I take care of people. I will be going to work in about 3 or 4 hours and take care of heart attacks and strokes and that kind of stuff.
There you go, folks. He's officially said, not for the, I think you said it every single time actually, that you're a doctor. I think you've said before a lot.
Nocturnist basically just means I'm a doctor at night. That's basically all it means. Yeah. So nothing cooler than that, unfortunately.
Yeah, nothing cooler than saving of lives kind of thing.
Whatever. Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, it's what I do. I love it. I spent a long time doing it. And I was blessed enough to also find, in addition to a job that I love, my writing, which is like my true passion now. And it's just, I don't know, I feel insanely blessed and lucky, honestly.
Yeah. You said that before. That this kind of feels like another calling, I guess you could say, as far as like the writing of this story. And I personally can feel it within your writing. You have so much passion for your characters. You care about tying up all your story ends. You put so much detail work into providing coherent progression levels, and everything makes sense in the world. And I know that takes a ton of research. I personally, from my own experience, writing a story of my own, like this takes a lot of background work. There's a ton of spreadsheets I have to put out. So I can only imagine your story, which is infinitely more complicated than my little narrative. It's like, so, thank you very much for taking the time to, in addition to a 12-hour day gig job, to write the story.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it is a labor of love, but this is a great time to segue into that. I don't do it alone. Like, the support of the LitRPG community is huge, but specifically like my beta readers and my gamma readers are awesome dudes. They say things that I don't want to hear sometimes. They harp on some stuff where I'm just like, just let it go, dude. But they're absolutely awesome. And especially like the moderator for the group, Jay Morgan, like he's done like a lot of things to sort of like make our group more interactive. And so, I mean, he's awesome too. So it is exhausting though. I've got like gigs of reference documents, and it's always a pain in the butt when I spend like a couple of hours writing a great scene that I think, and somebody's like, well, in book 3, such and such. I'm like, no, God damn it. Because, I totally forget. I don't get to read my books because I'm so busy writing them that sometimes it feels like a little disconnected to me a little bit, honestly.
Right, you're more living in the moment, and everyone else is like remembering the past that they just read like a couple of days ago, maybe. But that was like 6, 7, a year ago. Exactly. From your point of view. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it's one of the things that's being cool though is that some of my beta and gamma readers are helping me to get up to a version 2 with like, nothing like, there's no like new major plot arcs or anything, nothing that's contradicted. Like everything I've planned out has worked like sort of seamlessly, but there are little things like changing the name of certain spells or changing like, the way a potion is formulated, because I've got a much more detailed like mechanic for all of that and how it ties into this skill and that ability and blah, blah, blah. So that's coming through. And then also, unfortunately, when I first put my first like book out, my first 2 books out, there were like, little typos and errors and stuff like that unfortunately pulled people out of the story. And I think that we've streamlined maybe 99% of all that out, which is awesome.
Yeah, which is really one of the main benefits of having alpha, beta, gamma readers is that they catch all those little tiny details that you just can't do on your own. I know my wife reads my story. She catches some. I have a couple of alpha readers right now going through my story, and they come up with, I'm surprised the amount of details they see. Oh, you have this parenthesis wrong, this quotation, it is the wrong direction, this is the wrong tense. What about this detail here? This is mentioned differently before, and all that just makes for a better story. So they're really good. I'm really glad that you have a nice support group there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the LitRPG community. It's people that have been dying for. I mean, just like me before I even realized that I was going to be a writer. People have been dying for these stories. These are the stories that we've been raised to want to read, and it's like really exciting to see that. We're just blowing up right now. We just passed, like in the last 30 minutes, 2,000 members on the group. And a month ago, we were at like 1,500 members. And when I started it, we stayed at like 100 members for like months. But I mean, it's clearly picking up steam, which is awesome. And I can't even imagine like the really cool stories. I mean, when Brandon Sanderson finally comes over and decides LitRPG is the best thing ever, I mean, that'll be awesome. So, yeah.
No, I agree. The group has grown quite a bit. I'm always excited to see new people join the group and express their love for LitRPG the same way that I love LitRPG and you love LitRPG. And what's really always extra special to me is the fact that people are willing to create new stories within the group. That they're encouraged within our community to say, yeah, go try it. I did it. I'm a nobody, but I had some success. Here's my story. Some people liked it, some people didn't, but I put it out there, and it encourages new new people to put out their stories for the first time, to take up the pen for the first time, to tell their story. And that's so amazing to me that any one group can encourage so many people to express themselves.
It is. I mean, and the loyalty of all the LitRPG, lifers is what I call, people in the group, is that it's like anyone that puts out a new story and has like done any kind of communication, they are almost immediately hitting #1 in whatever, subgenre they're putting themselves on Amazon, which allows them to get exposure to other people that like know nothing about the group. It's also amazing that like so many of our authors will recognize how, it's a community-based effort, like, just the very simple idea that a rising tide raises all boats. So, they're getting these accolades from the group, but also at the end of their books, they're putting a link to, the group, and they're like, hey, this is good. And they can recognize like, hey, this is something that will help me for my future books. It's going to help other people. I mean, we live in a very, very competitive society, but I think a lot of people are wise enough to get that if it takes you 2 months to a year to write a book and it's taking someone 4 hours to read it, supply is never going to reach demand. Right. So it's, we really are in like, a cooperative kind of effort here rather than, being in competition, which I think also breeds more creativity. I think it's just like the perfect storm of awesomeness.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. We have a great community, great opportunity for many people to, I've even seen like authors who write other kind of stories, sci-fi, fantasy, and those genres kind of dip their toes into LitRPG, saying, this is something maybe I can do. Exactly. And sometimes it works well, and sometimes I don't think they understand what LitRPG quite is. Yeah. And so they make an effort, but it feels more cyberpunk than LitRPG. But we're always happy to see more and more. Like you said, there's never enough LitRPG. It's one of those, one of those kind of genres that you want more and more and more, and there's just never enough.
There's never enough. I mean, once you've read the stories, you're just jonesing for the next one. Yeah. It's good things.
Yeah. So good. Now let's talk a little about specifically book 5, the Swarm in your series. The Land, the Swarm is the title of the 5th book in your series. Up to books 1 through 4. Our main character, Richard, has gone to on a lot of adventures. He's created the Mist Village community. He's had some setbacks. A few people have died in some of the battles with the Bugbears and some other communities. We won't spoil who it is for anyone who's not caught up on the series yet. But in book 5, what's the storyline in book 5 that you want to tell people?
So book 5, in a nutshell, is looking at his village as a character in and of itself. And this was always the intention for me. I loved playing Skyrim. I loved playing Warcraft. I love the RPGers. But like my main love, it was always, world building. Civilization 4, awesome. Civilization 6, hopefully awesome. Odd number civilizations, kind of cursed. But I mean, that's going to be part of it. So it really focused a lot on the, world mechanics. It focused on growing the village. It focused on growing the other villagers, that he's not just this solo guy running through the world, because I wanted it to be realistic. Now, there are other storylines that may come up where it's just one person doing one thing, but he's not going to have the same impact as someone that's creating his own, city, civilization, empire, and it's not just based on him. Like right now, he's more powerful than most of the people that he's living with by far, but they're coming into their own. We're going to see more and more of that. Now, as they continue to go towards the forefront, there will be more fatalities, there will be more consequences, but I wanted us to start, being able to go on this macro level of his village as an entity interacting with other villages in various ways. Also, with Richter, sort of leading the forefront. And I think that's more than anything else what book 5 is about. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of great storyline. A lot of it does center around the Mist Village. It's getting bigger and bigger. You got walls going up, ditches being built around defensive units. You're bringing a lot more community members within the Mist Village. We won't spoil any of the how or why, but it's becoming its own entity, and I think it's becoming a lot for one person to kind of manage and control and to direct at this point. Do you have any plans to like set up anyone besides Richard as a leader, like a council at some point?
So that is one of the things that he's going to have to, kind of decide, and it's going to be a reflection of who he is as a person. So the idea of having like, a council of elders that can run everything sounds great until you realize that you're giving up your own individualized, dictatorial power. And it's like, how good of a person would the common person be if They were like, all right, well, here's your hundreds of people that you're in charge of. Feel free to give that power up if you want to. And it's like, how does that work? But at the same time, growing the Mist Village and letting it get its own nuance, letting it get its own powers, you can see it start acting independently of whatever he wishes, which I think is going to add another very interesting dynamic to where, you know, the storyline goes. And it's like, if he's not present for a while, like, it's not like it stays frozen in time, like things are going to happen. And he has to be cognizant of that. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting facet. You know, I'm excited to see where it's going to go to. I always have ideas about the milestones that I want to hit, but how I get there, like, it's a surprise to me as well when I write.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You can plan as much as you want sometimes for your story, but sometimes it takes its own pathway. And I get that. I'm really surprised about how many people are getting the professions in the Mist Village in this book. Like, people were just being grabbed left and right. Once they hit level 10, then they work on the profession stuff, and they just kind of disappeared. I'm like, well, that's an interesting mechanic there.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting too, in that I think somebody was like, you know, there were great veggies in this book, but I want more meat because there's more fighting and stuff like that. And, you know, I always loved like the fighting and stuff too. So I made a conscious decision to make my like leveling and experience gathering in my book more about combat than anything else. So you can have a lot of people that, you know, are an excellent cobbler or an excellent leather worker, and they've been doing it for 30 or 40 years, but they're still level 2 or level 3 because, you know, they're not going to go out and try to fight things. You're going to eat them alive just because. And, you know, because they were basically in this, you know, kingdom where the fighters and the rulers or whatever will level up, and, you know, they're just, you know, people not too different from common day, you know, civilizations that we have here. But now they're getting this experience of what is going to happen to their personality types, what is going to change with them. I just think was just a very interesting social dynamic as well. But yeah, it's going to come much more into play and make the village itself stronger, but also, you know, are they going to, you know, necessarily going to want to stay? Like, what happens if they decide they want to go somewhere else? What happens?
Are we going to get factions in the Mist Village?
And, you know, what happens if stuff start coming up? Right now, you've got all these different races that were just happy to be able to eat and stuff. But now that their bellies are full, like, what is going to happen with, you know, what they're thinking and saying? Yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
That is interesting. They're definitely, I foresee possibly factions developing within the Mist Village, especially if you end up going with the council. That's just ripe for, you know, intrigue within that community. Fighters versus crafters versus researchers. I'm sure everybody will have, you know, the village's best interests at heart, but that's a very interesting opportunity if you choose to, you know, go that direction.
And I mean, right now they're very like socialist kind of thing where no one has to, you know, pay for anything, whatever. Right. But, you know, that is going to start being supplanted as like, you know, one of the things that's going to come up is like, they've got a tavern that's going to be charged for. So how do they start paying for money? How do they start whatever? If he makes like, you know, a market, how is that going to start affecting things? What is he going to sell? Because, you know, you're not just going to take whatever you want. I mean, that's going to start being an interesting type of thing.
Yeah, but anytime you introduce economics into a community, there's always going to be some back and forth, some challenges, because now people aren't just looking out for everybody's benefit necessarily. They have to look out for their own monetary concerns because they have to pay for things. So you can't just give everything away for free for the community's benefit. Exactly. I noticed that as well. Like, Richard's like, hey, I'll give you all my spells for free, guys, because it benefits the community. But he also recognizes that the Mist Village's economic power is very lacking compared to the other kingdoms in the world. And that's going to be an issue later on because it costs money to grow your village. It costs money to upgrade the village's status and to expand and make the individual parts better. And he can't pay for it himself all the time with just a single adventuring. So at some point he's going to have to start collecting taxes and, you know, charging for things. And it won't be quite as, you know, hippy dippy, but it also creates some interesting opportunities for people to grow in ways besides experience levels and trade levels, also economic power.
Yeah. I mean, Richter's this weird mix of impulsive in his like personal life, but like extremely strategic when he's thinking about like how he's going to interact with the outside world. I don't know. I mean, like I said, it's interesting. And there's a lot, I will tell you, there are a lot of game dynamics that I have not introduced yet, which are going to start, you know, greatly coloring that as well. There are a lot of things that I think that people are taking for granted right now because of the way the book has progressed so far that are not necessarily true or inherently going to be the way it always is. I mean, as one or two people have mentioned, it's called Chaos Seeds, and he's the only one that we've seen so far, despite the fact that it's the size of Jupiter, and he's only been there for 5 months. But that is going to be like a massive dynamic that's going to, change things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to seeing the changes and some of the decisions that other people from our world would make in the land. What kind of pathway they're taking, because Richard's story is very kind of set as far as like his alignment, especially in this particular book. He kind of, I remember reading, I can't remember the exact phrasing of it, but he's hunting in the land and he's kind of talking to himself, and he's kind of solidifying his point of view as to the things he's willing to do to protect his community, protect his people. And he's like, it's not that I'm willing to kill or not, it's what am I willing to do to protect the people of my village so that they don't have to face these challenges unprepared. And I think that phrasing of that particular section to me kind of epitomizes his transition fully into this world. And I'm really curious to see what someone else's viewpoint is going to be, whether they have some other idea of like what it takes to survive. Is it going to be for them a goal of power at all costs, the community first, and sacrifice myself? There are just so many other opportunities when you start introducing people of equal potential, but of a different potential alignment.
And not just how they're going to choose to interact with the world, but what they're deciding the world should change for to reflect their own hangups and or beliefs and or, ideas that they brought with them. I mean, if you take, just pick 5 random people on this planet and stick them down there with their various socio-political, economic, religious, or whatever beliefs, how will that affect, kind of this tabula rasa blank slate of a world that doesn't have gods, that is fairly, feudal, that is whatever else like that. And, how is it going to change it?
Absolutely. Although I'm kind of curious, in this book, you don't have the gods at the beginning of this time, right? It was more, you were hinting at someone hunting Richard down, I think at the very beginning section of it.
At the beginning of the 4th book, there was a faction of the Dark Court that sent this sort of like high level, squad after him, and that was the captain of the squad at the beginning of this one. Yeah. Okay,
so I assume we're going to see more of him in book like 6 or 7.
I mean, it will come up. It will definitely come up.
Everything comes up at some point.
Comes up. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for letting me know about book 5 of this. I really had a great time reading it. Everybody who's seen reviews, they're all a little surprised by the cliffhanger at the end. But I'll tell you, I have full faith that you're going to resolve everything. And I know it's kind of an inside joke, but it's so fun.
It is. And there were, some people that were not super happy with the book when it came out. And, I said before, like, I think that Badu's, statement was right. Like, I'm an artist and I'm sensitive about my shit. Like, that's just, it's so, I was just immediately like, God, I will kill you. But then I got over it, I asked myself, why am I so sensitive about this? And I think it's very much because despite like in almost every other facet of my life, I'm very, if you don't like it, you got an option to get out. But this is such like a personal and intense, it's like my baby basically, that it did sort of like, leave you more open for, that kind of emotional roller coaster. But then I kind of just remembered like, what was it about writing that I really loved? And it's that I'm, just creating this world and that I'm breathing life into it, and getting that kind of perspective just like immediately brought peace back to me. Seems like there were like a few things that people were upset about. One was the index, which I think is totally justifiable. I was just thinking, okay, this is as long as Brandon Sanderson's, Stormlight book, so no one's gonna care. But I could totally see that if you're reading along and there's only like, then you're like, oh my God, 8% is index, that it would still piss you off. Like, I just didn't compute that. So that was great feedback. Like, in the future, I'm just gonna put a link to my website. Done. And that's just what's going to happen. There were a couple other things that people were upset about, and I'm like, well, there's a lot of options out there, so that's quite okay.
That is definitely a point of view. I can understand where you're coming from, and you're right. If people don't like the story, they can. There's a lot of other stuff for them to read. This is a story. This is your world. You get to decide. You get to decide the rules. And if they don't like it, that's their deal. As much as you try to accommodate them, because I didn't even mention already, if your alpha and beta readers bring up things all the time, and community members talk to you about how they feel about your story, and you do try to take it into account when you're writing. Ultimately, the characters do what they're going to do, what's best for them, and not necessarily for the readers.
Yeah. I definitely believe that there is a covenant between the author and the readership, but I also think that there's something to be said for not going with the grain, because people, at least like dorks like me that like to play games, like we love to complain about little nuances. And if we didn't have those little nuances to complain about, we'd be like, oh, this is boring now. I'm not really interested anymore. I've mastered this game. So, you have to, I've looked at a lot of different like author forums and stuff like that. And they say a lot of authors never even read the comments because they feel like, oh, it's going to derail me, or, oh, it's not really what I'm going to be about. And I think there's a good middle ground. I think that listening to constructive criticism is something that can drive you to be better, something that can keep you from making mistakes that you're just kind of blind to because you're in the rabbit hole. But I also, one of the things that people were upset about was that there was a homosexual scene in this book, despite the fact that it had been referenced a couple times before, and despite the fact that it was 3 sentences out of 500 pages. And honestly, I knew beforehand that this was going to be an issue. And my beta readers were like, whoa, you may not want to do this. You may not want to do this. And I think Joe Abercrombie made the point. He's like, I will never write about politics because I will immediately lose half of my readership. And I think that is a very valid point. But I know that for my own reading, for my own writing, I want to write a story that is vibrant and amazing, and I feel like I'm creating something good. I want to write a story that I would want to read. I want to write a story that I would be proud of. But I also want my writing to have a drive in perhaps slowly desensitizing people to certain topics. I have my own, journey that I'm working with certain very popular ideals that are being discussed in the news right now. But the one thing that I know for certain is that anyone that will, kind of go against someone because of their race, religious orientation, gender, sexual orientation, you're just on the wrong side of history. And I would like my writing to lightly reflect that, and hopefully, maybe even make a dialogue, because it seems like it did that, just this way. Never want to be preachy, but I do want my writing to mean something more than just enjoyment. Yeah,
no, I hear it. And I think in part, good writing does it. It challenges people to think differently. To me, that's the joy of science fiction, especially science fiction, in my opinion. Yeah. It challenges the mind. It expands the viewpoints of the reader. It makes them think differently about the possibilities of humanity and our futures. And I think LitRPG has that opportunity as well, just because it's set in such an open universe full of possibilities. And good writing has that effect, and it can have that potential of not just being entertaining and fun and interesting, but also making people think about the world around them. And in your books, you do that to a lot of lesser extent about morality, about what you would do in this kind of world. Would you kill to save people? How would your viewpoint change in creating a community? And this is just kind of another facet of that, in that this exists. It's not really a big deal. But for some people, it is. It makes them think about, I love this character, but this is the thing that I'm just learning about them. Do I still love them as much, or do I stop?
Yeah, and I agree. And that was sort of why I did it, because even though I know that sexuality has a very big impact on a lot of people and can very much color how they feel about certain things, it shouldn't. I think there's a lot bigger things that we can be concerned about in life, a lot bigger things that are happening right now that can concern us. Russia just recalled all of their diplomats. That's frightening. I think there's more that we could, be talking about. But I agree. The power of science fiction is that it can take us and let us examine, parts of our humanity that maybe we can't find the scenarios to do it here, but can definitely be like a sort of like a guidepost for us to be a better part of ourselves.
Yeah, I remember, like, who is it? I think it's Halderman or something. Some of his later stories were so interesting as far as like sexuality goes. I think he had like people who were time traveling to other parts of their time streaming, having like multiple partners of different lengths, like marriage contracts were different in the future. Like it wasn't a lifelong contract. It was like a 5 or 10 year thing for procreation, but you could still be with the person. And there are just so many possibilities within his writing. It was always surprising to me that people wouldn't at some point think like, yeah, human sexuality is going to change just like everything else about humanity. At some point, not only our needs, but our desires and our social constructs are all going to change, and you're with it or you're not. And if you're not, then,
that's fine.
That just goes away,
Yeah, just do you.
I got to mention, I just noticed like your shirt. Is that the new LitRPG shirt, man?
Our new gear. Yeah. So LitRPG, whatever. The website will be up sometime soon. There's going to be just bunch of like fun, new, cool things for people that, really love it, want to rock it. But yeah, this is just the adaptation of the LitRPG controller.
Yeah, that's nice idea. I like it. Like, it's really clean, really simple, but it's still, a nod to LitRPG and the gaming and the history of like video gaming in literature. So it's cool. We're going to move on to questions.
It's got to be this one. I mean, in my opinion, this is the controller. Yeah,
absolutely. So. That is the epitome of the popularization of video games, without a doubt, in my mind.
Absolutely.
Okay, moving on to questions from the audience. We have a ton of questions. You kind of already addressed the first one. Marcus Lejon asked, "Is Richard bisexual? If so, why wasn't mentioned in any of the other previous books?" So, is Richard bisexual?
So Richter honestly was looking at a couple people that looked like they belonged on a magazine and was like, you know what, fuck it. And, that's just what happened. His sexuality is not going to be a large part of any story arc. His sexuality may just go back to the way it was, but it was really just, I'm here. What the hell? And that's what happened.
It's been like 6 months for him, at least. So why not?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
That's a long dry spell, man.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're leading a forest community, I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, that's what's going to happen. So
that'll definitely happen. Okay, so there you go. That one's answered. Next one is Ardo Richardson. Richter references his mom and upbringing occasionally. How much of that is Aleron drawing on his own memories and upbringing?
My mom is the most wonderful, scariest 5-foot-tall person you've ever met in your life. A lot of the sayings were drilled into me. And I mean, there's a reason that the dedication for my first book is to her. She's amazing. She's made me into who I am. So, I mean, a lot of it is, very closely paralleled. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of the same way. When I reference things in my stories about family, relationships, memories, a lot of it's just from like, that's what happened to me. That's all I can draw on is the things that I've experienced and my history and past. I can't create a story based upon things I've never experienced. So it makes sense.
That's me. That's Mom.
Perfect. Okay. Next question I should say. Mine is Keanu Reeves becomes president in the future. Really?
Yeah. He's the one. Next, I mean, that just makes sense. So,
question answered. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Harold Phipps, maybe Pips. He mentioned he did not say that Keanu Reeves would be a great president, just that he was president. Now the question would be if he thought Reeves would be a good president or not.
Based on what's going on right now, I think we could do worse. So I think that's a pretty valid,
Yeah, absolutely. I would almost want to do a write-in campaign for Keanu Reeves.
For Reeves for president. Yeah.
Some of the other choices that are available. So I hear you. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Stephen Morse, author of the Continue Online series, asks, how many books are loosely planned for the land? He imagines between as many as it takes and depends on where the story goes.
So I always say that as long as people keep reading, I will keep writing. But the goal that I've set for myself just in life is to write 50 books that I can be proud of. Now, whether or not that's all with Richter's storyline or even all in the land, not 100%. I've been toying with the idea of maybe branching out into other different things. But as far as the current storyline I'm on, when I first started writing, I had 5 major plot arcs, planned out for this story. And I assumed that I would get to plot arc 2 by like book 3 or 4. And I'm like 10% of the way into the story that I was going to tell, because it's just developing into this, beast that's almost beyond my control. The idea that I would love to create just a universe that people could fall into, not too different from the Star Wars universe, where like, maybe there's time jumps, maybe there's this story, maybe there's that story, but it's all based on this, the premise of a world that could apply to the world that we live in, without too much, sort of upheaval. But yeah, I mean, he's also right that it's going to be based on if feel like I'm getting lost in the weeds, or if people kind of like clue me into that, then I may need to step back and revamp. But 50 is the goal that I set for myself.
Okay, 50 stories. That's the answer. Now, I had a side question for you. Would you be open to other people writing in your universe? The Star Wars universe has guest authors, right?
A couple people have approached me about that, and one of the things that I think I want to have done, and I think it might be a little too ambitious for this year, but what I would like to do is to either get a collection of short stories together by various authors within their own respective worlds that we can set on Amazon, and 100% of the proceeds go to a kind of a neutral charity like literacy or something like that. Mm-hmm. Or if there were other people that really loved it, then also the same token, we could do a collection of short stories within the land and set that 100% up for charity as well. I think right now, even though several people have approached me about it, I think right now it'd be a bit premature to have other people writing in my particular sandbox. I think I need to flesh out various ideas that, I haven't 100% formed yet, because the worst thing would be, if they're like, well, I thought this would be it. I'm like, no, that's really not the way it's going to be. So I think it's still a little bit early, but I think it's something that I'd be very amenable to in the future.
Okay, perfect. I love the idea of a bunch of short stories, an anthology of LitRPG stories put together. Yeah, there's some good stuff out there, but we could have one for our own genre.
Exactly. I mean, I think it'd be great. I think it'd be great exposure for the genre. I think it'd be great exposure for the individual authors, and I think it would be great if we, we're able to have a continual revenue stream, even if it only raised like a couple $100s a year. I mean, like it could add up. We could do like a LitRPG scholarship or something like that. I mean, I think that'd be a great thing to just add, that we can create something good.
And it's also a lot less pressure as a writer. Like you don't have to write, 100,000 words. It's 10,000 words. It's a small story. Throw it in the pile for the anthology.
Yeah, I mean that would be awesome.
Okay, next question. Let's see. Lucas A. Lewith. He asked audiobooks. I'm assuming he means, are you going to make more?
So I don't listen to audiobooks. So when I had mine made, I chose a guy that I thought sounded pretty good, and he had good reviews, and he'd done other good work. And so I've kind of just been waiting to hear what people thought about it. And I've been happily surprised that people are enjoying the audiobook. So now that, I think I'm going to crowdsource a couple more things. Like one person said that they like the sound effects, that they'd like more of them. Somebody else, sort of commented on they like the pacing, but they felt like maybe the action scenes could have been given a little bit more punch. I'm just going to kind of get a couple more ideas like that, and then I think I will, make the others into it. Though obviously the only other stumbling block is making sure that it's updated to the version that I wanted it to, and that's just another thing on my to-do list. But the answer is yes. The other ones will be made into audiobooks. But I very much welcome any like constructive criticism or comments or whatever that people have, so that I can make them as good as possible.
Yeah, audiobooks are a little tricky in that they're very dependent upon the person's listening style. Some people love sound effects. They love the it sounded like like an audio play. A lot of other people are like, no, sound effects just throw me off. I just want to hear the guy read. And the type of narrator people like to listen to just varies by taste. Some people love the deep voice. Some people love the high voice. Some people love somebody who just talks in monotone, or somebody's more action-oriented or lively when they speak and can change their voice texture. A lot of it's just, personal taste. And you got to kind of find that weird middle ground that kind of satisfies most people, but because you're never going to satisfy everybody. It's just it's that kind of thing, I think.
Yeah. I mean, but like I said, I'm not an audio guy. I think it's probably my ADD. I don't know. I can't sit still. But as long as people like it, then I want to give them what they want.
Yeah, and it's a nice new stream. Ebooks. You've already done ebooks. You have printed books now, and now audiobooks. Those are kind of the three trifecta for satisfying most people's desires.
Yeah.
As far as creating their story times. Okay. Next one is Jack McGowan. How do you choose your names for your books? Yeah, I think this came up before. In Catacombs, you don't have much catacombs. In Swarm, you don't have any swarms.
Well, so it initially was a joke with my forum readers where they said that they had this idea that they figured out that I never really write about what the title is in the book. And I came on that because I was hearing this documentary about J.R.R. Tolkien, who was pissed that his publishers made him call the last book Return of the King. He's like, you've just given away the end. Yeah. And I thought that was a really funny idea. And then it started being a sort of a joke with my readers where they were like, oh, this is definitely not going to happen. And the reason that there are no catacombs in book 5 is that they were 100% sure that I was going to talk about the catacombs in book 5. So I made sure not to really do that at all. But I have fixed it because book 6 is called Ambiguous. So there's not going to be any problem. It's going to be totally great. So.
Okay. Yeah. I know it's an inside joke, but some of your new readers aren't quite keen on that yet. It's not, I don't think it's as big a deal this time as it was last time. Like in your last review, it was like, I'm taking off a star because he didn't have any catacombs in Catacombs.
No, I mean, people were writing me like, you're a son of a bitch, and I almost broke my Kindle, and you're the worst person ever. Like, people were pissed. And
then they're like, oh, when's the next book, though?
Yeah. So, but no, I think that, but also part of it is that, like, the story will develop organically. And there are times where, I'm like, I need to delve so much more into this one faster than another. But I think it's just going to be a simple fix that I will not release the name of the book until later now. Simple as that. So people can be happy, because that is one of the main complaints that I think people have had.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just like expectation. Like, they're expecting this thing to be there, and when it's not, they're just disappointed. Like, wait, what happened to this thing that I was expecting?
Yeah, I think so too. But I think also, and that probably links into like the next question, where people are like, do you have too many plot arcs and story arcs going on that you haven't resolved? And, when I named the subtitle for my books a LitRPG saga, I really meant that. I want it to develop into this large thing. So there's nothing that's hanging. But also, one of the reasons that I revamped the books into a version 2 is so that people can see it's only been 5 months since he's been there. And he's like led a slave revolt and brought a celestial race into being and founded a village and has grown a tree that's never been seen. There's he's done a lot of stuff since July.
It's a very packed 5 months.
Yeah. So, these things are definitely coming up. But I will say that I wanted my books to be realistic, too. I hated it when I was playing a game where every little thing that was introduced definitely led to something else. I just don't feel like that's realistic to life. So there may be a quest that he, never solves out. There may be a magical item that he just never really figures out what it is. Or if he does, he, kind of figures out and decides not to mess with it. I wanted it to be the story of what any man would do put into this scenario. So there is a method to the madness. It's not like things are just willy-nilly being thrown out, but part of the method might be madness sometimes.
Yeah, I noticed that you started to throw in some of the items he's getting on the Celestial Forge. You're like, I'm not using these. Might as well just try to get the enchantment out of them at least, and make them for other people at least. Which is, to me, that's more of the real-time strategy aspect of the Mist Village. And I've noticed recently that it's going from just regular RPG, Richter story, to real-time strategy, Mist Village stuff. And I like the mix. It's really nice. Next question, though, is from Uncle Tim, Thor Thunder God. Why cliffhangers? I'm
a dick. I was just, I thought it was funny. My forum readers really thought it was funny, and then I'm gonna fade back on those.
I thought it was hilarious, this last one especially. It's very much like you don't want cliffhangers, this is what
here we go.
Look at this.
Yeah. Exactly. And honestly, if I hadn't thought of that joke, I might not have put one in this one. But like, I enjoyed it so much. But yeah, from now on, I think I'm going to fade back on that. But the first 5 books too have a certain tone to them, and I really liked. I personally think that Scott Lynch, like the Gentleman Bastard series, was a master at giving you the same characters in a completely different setting for each book. And I like that idea. So I think that for these next 5 books, you're going to start seeing a progression as well, because one of my other literary heroes was C.S. Lewis, writing his 7 Narnia books, where it really just was this like Candyland little baby thing. And it mirrored the progression to manhood. And it's where the 7th book was just extremely dark. I mean, J.K. Rowling basically adopted the same kind of idea. So you are going to see a progression in the tone and consequence as we move forward.
Okay, good to know. I look forward to reading it. Next question is from James Heffernan. Can you, Ramon, make a transcript of the interview? No, that's a lot of work for very little benefit. I actually tried this recently, taking suggestions from the audience for these kind of interviews. Someone asked me to cut up your first interview into like 5-minute sections based upon the questions. And it took me like 3 hours. I had the video. It wasn't too big of a deal, but the time frame was just editing, putting together, compiling, all that kind of stuff. And they like 25 people saw it. I'm like, okay, it was nice. I'm glad you enjoyed that. But a lot of time, do I want to put on all that extra work without any real benefit for a small community? So in this case, no. Sorry, James, I'm not going to do that. Now for Aleron, he asked, do you feel that given the amount of foreshadowing and abilities Richter has, eventually you will not be able to do them all justice or cover them accurately, or perhaps even lose track of them? You answered that in part. Did you want to answer that any more fully?
It's definitely not the easiest to pay attention to every little skill that he gets. But at the same time, I think like the realistic aspect is that like anything else, like let's say that, we can go into anything. I could have been a miner. I could have been a carpenter. I could have been, anything. And we like all these things when we're kids, but you kind of get your own wheelhouse and what you're good at. So he'll be able to fall on these various things. But if he's not feeding them, if he's not training them, then they're just still rudimentary. Like right now, Richter's tough, but he hasn't really gone against too many very high level enemies like mano a mano. And if he was going up against like some just cutthroat warrior and there's just the 2 of them in an alley, I don't necessarily think he might do too great. Maybe
he didn't do great when he came upon those characters.
And he gets hosed because these are people that are trained killers. So the skills are always important, but he has to take the time to invest in them. And while the progression from like 1 to 10 skill levels is not so hard, the exponential increase in difficulty is intense. There's a reason that we haven't really seen too many adepts yet.
Absolutely. And it's kind of the difference between being a jack of all trades or being a specialist. The specialist is always going to be better at that thing that they do. The jack of all trades can handle more situations, which in the case of the Mist Village was really important at the beginning when he had to do everything. But now that he has people who specialize in armor making, sword making, alchemy, herbalism, healing, whatever, he can kind of fall back from that jack of all trades position and focus on the things that are really beneficial and important that only he can kind of do.
Yeah. And that's was sort of one of the points of the skill grinding where he had a set schedule every day. But 9 out of 10 of those things were revolving around his combat abilities, because that's where, he's sort of going more than anything else. And he's learning the construction because there's a perk to it. But, sooner or later, like when he leaves, that's going to have absolutely no, like if he has to leave the village for a little bit, that's going to have absolutely no impact on what's happening while he's gone. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And other people, that's one of the great things about having a community is that other people can kind of pick up the slack when you're not around. You don't have to be there to do everything. That's the benefit of having a diverse group of people under you who are good at what they do. You can trust them to continue on and work hard and to make progress without you watching their every single move.
Yeah. So, him sending Basil to the mountains to talk to the dwarves is like one of the best examples of that, where, that could have been a whole different, way that it went, but he had someone that he could send to do that. whether or not he's going to do a good job, that's kind of up in the air. But yeah.
I always kind of see those little opportunities as like short stories, like Basil goes to the doors, one merchant goes back to the city to try to do trade, like those little stories that happen. I think those are perfect formats for short stories for,
Yeah. So, I think it's going to be good. Yeah.
Okay. James has a few more questions. How developed will a Mist Village eventually become? Will it turn into an entire city? Will the village level up in the next book?
Spoilers. So, yeah. No.
Okay, there you go. Sorry. I eventually see a Mist Village nation, personally.
I think that'd be awesome. And a research. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. No. I'm not going to spoil anything for anybody. I'll wait till the books come out. Okay. Thomas Vlag Fistrik. I hope I'm saying it right. What happens with unfinished quests that have been there from the beginning? Unfinished quests are piling up, and the story may be stuck on small day-to-day stuff. I think you've already talked about this a little bit as far as like quests. Just sometimes they're going to go unfulfilled. I know you can do your best in trying to keep track of all of these things and address them and work on them. Do you feel like it kind of bogs down the story sometimes?
I think that there's two different types of readers that we have. Just maybe there's like two different types of gamers. Like you can go and just want to plow through the the story and you're just looking for the quick resolution. I always really love the nuances of the games and really powering up so that can make the coolest gear and to fight this and blah blah blah. My books are less like a classic movie series where everyone is basically a self-contained thing moving towards one goal. My books are more like episodes of, Scandal or Elementary, these hour-long kind of, blocks where you are going to get a different character of, story based on which block that you're reading, and also that it's moving towards this overall general story. So the over looming threat right now is with the bugbears and there's skirmishes going on over here and what's really about that. But as we move forward, he's having to, you can't just focus on that 24/7. He's moving towards other things. There will be some of the quests that will not be resolved for a good long while, simply for the fact that they're not accessible or they're just too far. Or I know people are very interested in seeing the village level up or unlocking more powers, but he can barely deal with what's happening now, and he has a responsibility to all of these non-combatants that are there that are protected by a 5-foot wall, which is nothing. I
was concerned about the 5-foot wall when I read it, and then I realized there's also a 10-foot trench in front of it and a 20-foot trench behind it, I think. So that makes more tactical sense.
That makes more tactical sense, but at the same time, if there was ever like a concerted rush,
it's easy to just have the ladders go right over the wall, and or archers, take out all your guardsmen, and then you need like some overhang over the wall to cover them, or whatever the case is. So.
But they're going to build it up, and but again, it's only been like 3.5 months since they got there, and they're having to build this community from scratch. So
Yeah, no, I hear it. Everything takes time, and you can't put everything you want to necessarily in one book, which is why it's taking you 5 books to cover 10% of the things that you've wanted to like the next story, which is something you said, I think, in each one of the interviews, that this story is just a beast sometimes. Like you as an author feel like you have to tell so many particular portions of it, and just covering these basic storylines and making it interesting takes so much time that you're not getting quite as far as you thought you would by this point.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, but I'm happy with the way that it's building. And I feel like each time it gets easier to move forward based on the rules and mechanics that you've already set down, and you don't have to explain as many things, which is great. There's going to be a lot more sort of fast-paced things happening in the 6th book because I was able to make such a foundation in the 5th book, I think.
Yeah, having a good foundation is really important. Thomas Hub also asked, when will the story expand? We know the 30-mile radius around the village and a few scenes from Law, but it's mostly about nothing about the land as a larger whole. Are you going to expand the story?
The story will expand, but even with the entire map that we're looking at, right, that's just like one little peninsula on a planet that's larger than Jupiter. So there may be parts of it that you will never really know about. I mean, I also wanted it to be a reflection of the true like medieval kind of setting where people in France didn't know anything about people in China very much. I mean, anecdotally, but no one ever really traveled there. Now that's not going to be as bad because of the magical system and everything that we have, but I think also you will start seeing it with the advent of portals. There's going to be a lot of potential in that particular arena.
Yeah, portals definitely, they're like the automobile. They made the world a lot smaller. And medieval times, like most people never travel outside their village. There's a 10-mile radius around the village, and like 80% of the people never left that area. So their stories were very localized. With the advent of more modern transportation methods, like the horse and buggy, especially the automobile and transportation networks, the world got smaller. People could travel farther. Resources could be shared over larger areas. And so that's what the portals are going to be.
Yeah, exactly. And with the finishing of the ship in the village, that's going to be kind of huge too. And so the portals have to be built. Yeah.
Perfect. Let's see. A few of my questions, and I think that'll be it. If you could have one item, ability, or spell from your novels, what would it be and why?
One item, ability, or spell. Let's see. Boom. He used the hell out of charm at first. That seems like a really good thing you can just, hit him and quit him and move it on. That seems like that would be, especially if you had the bump that he has with his life magic. So yeah, that'd be good. Yeah. That's
an interesting choice. I swore I thought you were going to think the belt of sustenance. I'm like 4 hours of sleep, half the food, and you're good all day. I thought that's where you're going to go, but charm, I think you're charming enough, man. I don't think you need the extra alone.
The belt of sustenance is so interesting because when I first wrote it, I thought it would be a good thing to have, but it's only really useful if you have other things set up to monopolize that. Like if you were just, sitting in a field and you had all that time, you're like, well, I'm still just sitting in the field. But with him, it's become the most powerful one. So I don't know, it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I was also super glad to see that you started using his mana regeneration in this book, like automatically all the time to start fulfilling other spell requirements. And then it never really occurred to me that, that's a lot of wasted potential. If it's constantly reproducing and it's just, you fill up your mana bar and that's it, that's a lot of wasted potential energy.
It is.
And he finally found a use for it.
Yeah. He did that, but then he started summoning hundreds of mistworkers. So it's like he's made very little progress, unfortunately, on the improved sonic damage. But I like the idea that his people can start being better equipped, more of a force. He's starting to realize that dream like he did against, the goblins. Like they were unequipped. And even though there were 4 or 5 times as many of them, I think that would also be a realistic thing that you would see here, 30 common people against, 5 soldiers. The 5 soldiers are going to win every single time. So, yeah.
Yeah, training and experience and equipment actually matter in real life, and so they should matter in the land. And you've done a good job of reflecting that, and especially like in the last few scenes where you were talking about as they're getting at the enemies, the quality of weapons really made a huge difference for his character, especially as they're kind of power leveling the trade skill men.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's cool.
Okay, that can kind of be it. I realized I asked the other questions previously about Richter's philosophy and whether or not it's going to change at some point. He's kind of come to a balance at this point of what he's willing to do to protect his people. I think that at some point it's going to become on a slippery slope for him, especially as he meets other chaos seeds, as it comes into more dangerous situations where his village is at odds. Can you confirm whether that's going to be the case or not?
It definitely will, because right now he's still running a government of several hundred people, which gives you certain allowances. As the population gets bigger and as he has to do certain things and as he's wanting to, teach the children of his village to believe in goodness and truth, but what does he have to do to sacrifice that? There's going to be some personal allowances that he's going to have to make in order to create that. And whether or not that's hypocritical or not is some of the things that I'm going to start examining. But right now we're kind of still in this idyllic little, South Parky mountain town that he's just enjoying himself with. But yeah, these kind of real world things are going to start coming up. Yeah.
So some challenges are going to be facing the Mist Village and Richter and his friends. So we'll look forward to seeing that. So that's going to be about it. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, the website is coming up. Finally. The newsletter, sign up for that because, I know that for me, like I used to just get so frustrated searching for, new LitRPG and everything that's out there. And I think it's going to be a great resource for, then you just don't have to, like, we'll just blast like maybe once every Sunday or something like that. And yeah, I think it's awesome. I think we're growing. So that's good things. Yeah.
Perfect. I'm always happy to see the genre growing. I mean, that search kind of quandary was kind of the reason I started a LitRPG recommendation page, just because I couldn't find anything otherwise.
Exactly.
Amazon's listings are kind of weird, and not everything on that listing works. So it's good to see that you're addressing the needs of the community in this way. And of course, you can sign up for the LitRPG newsletter. We're going to have a link in our show notes for you guys who are watching. You can click on it; it'll take you to the sign up page. And so it'd be great to get new stuff from Aleron.
So it'll be good times. Appreciate it, Ramon.
No problem. Thank you very much for talking to me. Everybody, you guys have a good day. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, folks, to go read some more LitRPG.
All right. Bye, guys.